The night Amara Bennett tore up her pregnancy test, she told herself it was the right thing to do. She was wrong. Her ex-husband Marcus had just signed the divorce papers that morning. 5 years of marriage dissolved in under 4 minutes at a lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee and broken promises. And now, alone in the bathroom of her sister's apartment, staring at two pink lines that should have meant everything, Amara felt nothing but terror. She ripped the test in half, then in half again, dropped the pieces in the trash and covered them with a paper towel like evidence at a crime scene. That was the first decision that changed everything. The second decision was letting Nia talk her into going out. If you've ever watched someone you love make a choice you knew would destroy them and said nothing, then you already understand this story. This is not a love story. Not exactly. It's the story of a woman who thought she had lost everything, walked into the worst night of her life, and came out the other side holding something she never expected to find. If this is your first time here, subscribe and follow along, because this story is only getting started, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the night it all began. The club was called Onyx, and it sat at the end of a street in downtown Los Angeles where the buildings got taller and the lighting got colder. Amara had been inside exactly twice in her life, once for a bachelorette party that wasn't hers, and once by accident when she followed the wrong group of people through the wrong door at the wrong time. She did not want to be there on this third occasion either. "You need this," Nia had said, standing in Amara's doorway 2 hours earlier with a dress draped over one arm and a look on her face that was trying too hard to be casual. Nia was 26, 6 years younger, and had spent most of her adult life operating under the assumption that the solution to pain was movement. Keep moving, keep dancing, keep your body busy enough that your mind couldn't catch up with how bad things actually were. "I don't need a club, Nia. You need to not sit alone in this apartment thinking about Marcus." I wasn't thinking about Marcus. That was a lie. She had been thinking about Marcus, and the divorce papers, and the pregnancy test she'd destroyed, and the fact that she was 32 years old and felt like someone had hollowed her out and left the shell standing. "Put the dress on," Nia said. Amara put the dress on. She told herself it was just one night, a few hours. She'd have a club soda, watch Nia dance badly, go home, and figure out the rest of her life in the morning. That was the plan. The plan lasted approximately 45 minutes. Onyx was the kind of place that had a VIP section separated from the main floor by a frosted glass partition and two men in suits who looked like they'd been hired specifically because they made people feel small. The music was expensive, the kind engineered to feel both intimate and enormous at the same time. The lighting shifted between blue and gold in intervals, slow enough that you didn't notice it changing until the whole room felt different. Nia had gotten them past the line, past the door, past the first checkpoint without explanation, and Amara had been too tired to ask how. She should have asked. They were at the bar. Amara with her club soda, Nia with something that came in a glass shaped like a geometry problem. When Amara noticed the shift, it was subtle. The kind of shift a room makes when someone enters who the room has been waiting for without knowing it. Conversations dipped, heads turned, then quickly looked away. Two men near the partition straightened without meaning to, the way people do when something activates the part of the brain that still remembers predators. She followed the direction of everyone else's not looking and found him. He was standing at the entrance to the VIP section, not moving yet, just existing in the space with the kind of stillness that suggested he was completely unbothered by the attention and also completely aware of every person in the room. He was Korean, early 40s, in a dark suit with no tie, and he was looking, not at the crowd, not at the room, directly at her sister. Amara felt the cold before she understood why. "Nia." Who is that man?" Nia did not look up. That was the tell. Nia always looked at things, always turned toward noise and movement and drama like a compass finding north. The fact that she kept her eyes on her drink when Amara said that man meant she already knew exactly who he was. "Nia." Amara set down her club soda. "Look at me." Her sister looked at her, and in Nia's eyes, under the makeup and the forced brightness and the careful performance of a fun night out, Amara saw something she hadn't seen since their mother's funeral. She saw fear. What did you do? Amara said. It came out in pieces, the way terrible things always do. Not in a clean confession, but in fragments pulled out by direct questions, each answer revealing another layer underneath it, like finding out a wall you've been leaning against was never load-bearing. The gambling had started 8 months ago. Online at first. Sports, card games, the kind of thing people told themselves wasn't really gambling because it was on a phone screen and felt like a game. Then a friend of a friend introduced Nia to private tables, the kind that didn't have addresses listed anywhere, that you found through a person who knew a person, and where the minimum buy-in was more than Amara made in a month. I was winning, Nia said. In the beginning. Everyone's winning in the beginning, Amara said, and hated how much she sounded like their mother. The debt had grown to $80,000 before Nia understood what was happening. And then someone introduced her to a different kind of lender, the kind that didn't use banks. His name is Kong Min Jai, Nia said, very quietly. I don't know that name. I know you don't. The man still hadn't moved from the entrance to the VIP section, but now he was talking to one of the suited men, and the suited man was listening with the specific posture of someone who takes orders and doesn't ask twice. He owns things, Nia said. Businesses, properties, other things that aren't technically businesses. She paused. He bought my debt. From the original people I borrowed from. He just absorbed it, like it was nothing. How much? Nia was quiet. How much, Nia? 140,000. The number landed like something physical. Amara actually felt it in her chest. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of dull impact. The sound a door makes when it closes on a room you needed to stay in. And you brought me here, Amara said. He said, Nia's voice cracked. He said he had a proposition, for you specifically, that if you just meet with him, he knows my name. Yes. He researched me. He researches everyone. Amara picked up her club soda. Her hand was completely steady, which surprised her because inside she felt like someone had replaced her blood with cold water. She looked at the man across the room. He was still talking to his associate, still not looking at her. Except he was. She could feel it the way you feel a temperature change. Not seeing the thermometer move, just knowing the air had shifted. You set me up, she said. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice. Amara put the glass down. You made one. You just made it about me instead of you. Nia flinched. Good. The truth should land like that sometimes. The suited man appeared at Amara's left shoulder approximately 3 minutes later. He was polite about it. No hand on her arm, no instruction that sounded like a command. Just, Mr. Kong would like a moment of your time, Ms. Bennett, if you're willing. If you're willing. As if the alternative was a real option. As if Amara could say no thank you and walk out of Onyx and go back to her apartment and her torn pregnancy test and pretend none of this was happening. She looked at Nia. Nia looked at the bar. Fine, Amara said. The VIP section was quieter than the main floor. Acoustically different. The music still present but muffled, like it was on the other side of a decision. There were 4 other people in the space, all of them Korean, all of them arranged with the studied casualness of people who were absolutely not relaxed. They looked at Amara and through her at the same time. Kang Min-jae was sitting at a low table in the far corner. He stood when she approached. Not a performance, just a habit. The kind of thing someone does when courtesy is so old in their bones, it's automatic. Up close, he was less cinematic than he'd been from across the room. There were lines around his eyes. A small scar along his left jaw, old enough to have faded to silver. His hands, resting at his sides, had the kind of stillness that came not from calm but from long practice at managing whatever wasn't calm. Ms. Bennett, he said. His English was precise and nearly unaccented, with just enough texture at the edges to remind you it wasn't his first language. Sit, please. She sat. Not because he told her to, because her legs had been threatening to give out for the last 3 minutes, and she would be damned if she let him see that. Your sister told you, he said. It wasn't a question. She told me some of it. I'll tell you the rest. He sat across from her. One of the men brought water. Just water. No alcohol, which Amara noted. Nia accumulated a significant debt through channels that don't tolerate non-payment. I bought that debt 2 months ago. I have not collected on it, and I have kept the original creditors from contacting her because I was waiting. For what? for the right moment to make you a proposition. You were waiting for my divorce. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. Yes, because you assumed I'd be desperate. Because I assumed you'd be available. He looked at her steadily. I don't work with people who aren't free to focus. What kind of work? He folded his hands on the table. Research, verification, background analysis on business partners, potential threats, financial irregularities. You have a master's degree in information science, 4 years as an investigative analyst for a private firm downtown, and a reputation for discretion. A pause. I checked. I noticed. I need someone I can trust to be accurate and honest. The people around me have learned to tell me what I want to hear. That's useless. He said it flatly, without self-pity. I need someone who won't. Amara looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without performing anything. No charm, no threat. Just waiting. And if I say no, then you say no. He reached into his jacket and placed a card on the table. Plain. No name, just a number. Nia's debt stays absorbed. She owes me nothing further. You leave, I don't contact you again. That's the version where I say no. Yes. She looked at the card. What's the version where I say yes? A 1-year contract, structured salary. Legal work only, research, analysis. Nothing that would put you in a courtroom or a cell. You work from my estate, housing included, access to medical. He let that land. All of it. Medical. She heard it. She wondered if he'd said it deliberately or if the universe was simply that direct sometimes. Your sister's debt becomes a completed account, he continued. She owes nothing. The original creditors leave her permanently alone. You leave after 1 year with the agreed compensation and no further obligation. Amara's hand was on the table. She looked at her own fingers. The indent where her wedding ring had been for 5 years was still visible, barely, like a ghost. Why me specifically? She said. There are research analysts who aren't recently divorced women with nothing tying them down. Because most of them are afraid of me, he said simply. And you're not. She looked up. You've been sitting across from me for 8 minutes, he said. And you haven't looked away once. You haven't performed calm. You actually have it, or something close enough that it functions the same way. A pause that felt considered. That's rare. She wanted to tell him she wasn't calm. She wanted to tell him that her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her back teeth, and that she had destroyed a pregnancy test 4 hours ago in her sister's bathroom, and that her entire life had been a controlled implosion since 9 a.m. this morning. Instead, she said, I want the agreement in writing. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, smaller than that. The ghost of an acknowledgement. It will be ready tomorrow morning, he said. Yep. Nia was still at the bar when Amara came back, still nursing the same geometrically shaped glass. She looked up, and the fear in her face had shifted into something more complicated. Part relief, part guilt, part the expression of someone who knows they are about to be forgiven before they've been fully punished. Amara sat down beside her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. I'm sorry, Nia said finally. I know it's not enough yet, Amara said. But it's a start. Nia nodded. Her throat worked. He's going to clear your debt, Amara said. Nia's eyes filled. Amara, don't. Amara picked up her club soda. Don't cry about it right now. I can't hold your feelings and mine at the same time. So they sat there in the noise and the shifting blue-gold light, two sisters who had always been better at surviving than at talking, and Amara looked at her own hands and thought about what she had just agreed to. A year, 12 months, in the house of a man who ran the kind of businesses that didn't have websites. And somewhere in her body, 8 weeks along and already changing things without her permission, a fact she'd tried to destroy was still quietly, stubbornly, alive. She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, just for a second, under the bar where no one could see it. Then she picked up her drink and finished it in one long swallow. She had a lot of decisions ahead of her. Tonight she'd made the first one. Whether it was the right one, that was the question she'd be living inside for the next 12 months. The contract arrived at 7:14 in the morning, not by email, not by messenger. By a woman, Mid-40s, Korean, hair pulled back with the precision of someone who had long stopped caring about anything decorative, who knocked on Nia's apartment door holding a manila envelope and a pen and said nothing beyond Ms. Bennett before extending both toward Amara's chest. Amara took them. The woman left. No car. No sound of footsteps in the hallway after she turned. Just gone, the way smoke goes. Nia was still asleep. Amara could hear her through the thin wall. Slow, unconscious breathing, the sound of someone who'd cried themselves to exhaustion and passed out somewhere around 3 in the morning. Amara hadn't slept. She'd sat in the kitchen with the light off and her feet flat on the linoleum and thought about every decision that had led to this particular morning in this particular chair, which was a useless exercise, and she'd done it anyway because that's what humans do in the dark when there's no one watching. She opened the envelope at the kitchen table. 12 pages. Dense. Legal language so specific it had the texture of someone who'd had agreements broken before and was no longer interested in ambiguity. The salary was listed on page 3. She read the number twice, set the page down, picked it up, and read it again. It wasn't obscene. It was precise. The kind of number that said, I researched what you're worth, and I'm offering exactly that, not $1 more, which was somehow more unnerving than if he'd tried to impress her. There was a clause on page 7 that she read 4 times. It stated that any medical needs arising during the contract period would be covered in full by the employer, with no requirement to disclose the nature of said needs in advance. He knew, or he suspected, or he was simply thorough enough to build a door for every possible situation, which was its own kind of knowing. She signed on page 12. Her hand didn't shake. Then she went to wake up her sister. Nia took the news the way she took most things she couldn't undo, with a long silence followed by a string of words that weren't quite apologies and weren't quite arguments. Somewhere in the territory between the two where people live when they feel guilty and defensive at the same time. You didn't have to do this, Nia said. I know. I didn't ask you to. You brought me to that club, Nia. You sat me at that bar. You knew exactly what you were doing. Amara poured coffee she didn't want into a mug she'd washed twice already, just to have something to do with her hands. What you didn't do was ask me. There's a difference between needing help and setting someone up to have no choice. Nia's jaw tightened. I was scared. I know you were scared. I'm scared right now, and I'm the one who signed the paper. She set the mug down. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because someone has to, and you already proved you can't get yourself out of it alone. That's not fair. No, Amara agreed. It's not. None of this is fair. Fair stopped being an option about 8 months ago when you sat down at your first private table. The silence between them was the kind that had history in it. Years of it, layer after layer, the compressed sediment of two sisters who loved each other in a language that had never quite translated into ease. When do you leave? Nia asked finally. This afternoon. Nia looked at the signed envelope on the table. Something moved across her face, complicated, unresolved, not ready to be named yet. Be careful, she said. I will. I mean it. These people. I know what these people are, Nia. Amara picked up her coffee. I'm not going in blind. She was, partly. But the part of her that wasn't blind was just going to have to work harder than the part that was. The estate was 40 minutes north of the city, past the point where Los Angeles stopped performing itself and became something quieter and more honest. Hills that went brown in summer. Eucalyptus trees in rows that someone had planted decades ago for reasons that no longer mattered. The car that came for her was black and without logos, driven by a man who confirmed her name at the door and said nothing else for the entire drive, which Amara spent looking out the window and eating a gas station granola bar because she'd forgotten to eat breakfast, and her stomach had begun sending urgent, inarguable messages about the situation. The estate appeared at the end of a private road behind a gate that opened without any visible mechanism. It was large without being theatrical, stone and glass and long horizontal lines, the architecture of someone who had money old enough to have gotten bored of showing it. The grounds were managed but not manicured. There were cameras at intervals she counted automatically, an old habit from 4 years of security analysis. She counted 11 before the car stopped. A man named Park met her at the door. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with the careful neutrality of someone who had trained themselves out of legible expressions. He showed her to a room on the second floor, large, clean, windows facing east, bathroom attached, a closet with empty hangers, a desk with a lamp. "Mr. Kong will see you at 6, Park said. "For dinner?" "For your first briefing." She unpacked her 2 bags. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the ambient hum of the house's ventilation system, and somewhere below, the distant sound of a conversation in Korean too muffled to parse. She sat on the bed and put her hand on her stomach for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood up and opened her laptop. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it prepared. Minji's office was on the ground floor at the back of the house, behind a door that looked like every other door in the hallway, until you noticed that it was the only one without a number. He was standing when she came in, looking at something on a secondary screen, and he didn't turn immediately. Not power play, just focus. When he did turn, he looked at her the way people look at things they've made a decision about and are now observing to see whether the decision holds. "You read the whole contract," he said. 3 times. "Good." He moved to the main desk. "Sit." "You say that a lot." He paused, looked at her. "Do you prefer to stand?" "No, I just notice patterns." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, just an acknowledgement that it almost could have been. He sat. She sat. On the desk between them, a folder, a tablet, and 2 cups of tea she hadn't seen anyone bring in. "The first assignment," he said, sliding the folder toward her, "is a background analysis on a man named Daniel Cho. He's presented himself as a logistics partner out of Vancouver. He comes with references and a clean paper record." Amara opened the folder. Corporate registration documents, financial statements, 3 reference letters on letterhead that looked right without quite feeling right. "But," she said, "but 2 of the men who vouched for him have interests I already know to be compromised." He folded his hands. "I want to know if he's a genuine opportunity or if someone is using him to move a problem in my direction." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that becomes expensive to ignore." She looked up from the folder. "I need full access to financial databases, legal ones." "You'll have it. And I need to work independently. I don't want someone looking over my shoulder revising what I find before it gets to you." He held her gaze. "That's the point of hiring you. I want it stated explicitly. I'll have Park update the contract addendum tonight." She looked back at the folder. The tea on her side of the desk was ginger. She hadn't told anyone she preferred ginger. She picked it up, drank it, and said nothing about it. The first week was the kind of difficult that doesn't announce itself. Not dramatic difficulty, procedural difficulty. Learning the shape of a place, its rhythms, the particular silence that meant Minji was in a bad meeting versus the particular silence that meant the house was simply at rest. Learning that Park communicated primarily in the negative. What he didn't say told you more than what he did. Learning that there were 2 other staff members who lived on the property. A cook named Mrs. O, who operated the kitchen with the intensity of someone diffusing something, and a security man called Ryu, whose job appeared to be standing in doorways and making rooms feel smaller. Ryu watched her. Not the way men sometimes watched women, without that specific heat. More the way a dog watches a new person enter the house, assessing, patient, not yet decided. She watched him back. The Daniel Cho analysis took her 4 days. What she found was methodical and specific. Cho's Vancouver operation was a shell over a shell. Legitimate on the surface layer, borrowed credibility in the middle, and in the deepest layer, financial pathways that connected to an organization she recognized from 3 years of professional research as one of the most aggressive territory expansion groups operating on the West Coast. They weren't sending Cho to partner with Kong Min-jae. They were sending him to audit him, to find the edges of his operation and map them. She printed the report, 8 pages. No speculation, only documented chains of evidence. She brought it to Min-jae at 7 in the evening. He read it in front of her, which she hadn't expected. Most people took documents away to read them privately, leaving the presenter in suspension. He read it at his desk while she stood, not sitting because he hadn't told her to, and she was still working out the choreography of this particular relationship. And she watched his face while he read. Nothing moved in it. Not alarm, not anger. He read the way people read who have long since learned that information itself is neutral. It's the response to it that matters. When he finished, he set the report down and looked up at her. "How certain are you?" he said. "The financial pathways. 93%. The organizational connection, I'd put it at 88. There's one transaction I couldn't source completely. But your read? My read is 100%. The incomplete transaction is the tell, not the evidence. When someone scrubs one payment in a chain of 30, they're not being careful. They're being obvious about being careful. He looked at her for a moment that stretched past comfortable. I'll cancel the Vancouver meeting, he said. And Cho? That's not your concern. She held his gaze. If he disappears, it creates a different kind of problem. It tells whoever sent him that you found the thread. Min-jae was quiet. Better if he believes the meeting simply fell through, she said. Business reasons. No urgency. Reschedule indefinitely. Let him sit in Vancouver wondering whether you're stupid or playing him. That buys you 6 months at least before they try the next approach. The silence was long enough that she almost walked it back. Then he said, write up the recommendation. She wrote it up. He implemented it within 48 hours, and the thing it triggered in her was not relief. It was something more uncomfortable. The recognition that she was good at this, that her brain, which had spent 4 years in a job she was technically qualified for and emotionally disconnected from, had come alive in the specific texture of this problem. That she had walked into a dangerous man's house and found, against every reasonable expectation, something that felt like the right work. She did not know what to do with that. The pregnancy made itself known in the 3rd week. Not dramatically. Her body was not interested in drama. It was interested in logistics, and it managed the first trimester the way a bureaucracy manages a policy change, through a series of small, inconvenient adjustments that compounded into something impossible to ignore. The nausea arrived reliably at 5 in the morning and lasted until 9. She managed it with crackers from Mrs. O's kitchen, taken quietly before the rest of the house was awake, eaten standing over the sink in the dark. She was there one morning, 5:17, crackers, fluorescent light hum, when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. There's ginger in the cabinet above the stove, Min-jae said. She turned around. It was in running clothes, plain, dark, not the studied casualness of someone who wanted to be seen exercising, but the genuine utility of someone who ran because not running made them harder to be around. His hair was slightly damp. He'd already been out. I know about the ginger, she said, the fresh kind. Not tea. He moved past her to the cabinet in question, opened it, and took out a small piece of root wrapped in cloth. He set it on the counter beside her. Peel a small piece, hold it. Sometimes the smell helps more than consuming it. She looked at the ginger. She looked at him. How long? She said. Since the 2nd day. He filled a glass of water at the sink with his back to her, which she understood was intentional, giving her somewhere to look that wasn't his face while she absorbed that. I noticed you weren't eating dinner. The timing, He paused. I've been around enough people to know what early pregnancy looks like. You didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say. He turned back, held out the water. Drink slowly. She took it. You could have used it. In this contract negotiation, you had leverage and you didn't use it. Yes. Why? He looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has thought through a question before it was asked. Because it was irrelevant to the work, and because using someone's vulnerability against them when they're already in a difficult position is... He stopped, looked for the word, settled on wasteful. Amara held the glass and looked at this man who ran criminal enterprises across 3 states and had used the word wasteful to describe not exploiting a pregnant woman's fear, and she thought, this is the thing that's going to be complicated. Not the danger, not the work. This. Nia called on a Thursday, 3.5 weeks in. Amara took it in her room, door closed. How is it? Nia asked. Fine. Just fine? It's work, Nia. It's not a vacation. But he's not... A pause. He's treating you okay? Eh? Yes? You sound weird. I'm tired. Amara. What? Another pause, longer this time, weighted with the specific frequency of something being decided. I saw Marcus yesterday. Amara felt the name land in her chest. Not the way it used to. Not with the hot, immediate quality of active pain. More like pressing on a bruise you'd forgotten was there. Okay. He was asking about you, whether you were... He said he'd heard you'd moved. Heard from who? I don't know. He has people who... Nia stopped. He wants to talk to you. No. He said, Nia, no. Her voice came out flat and clean. Not angry. Anger would have meant he still had the ability to produce something urgent in her, and she was working very hard to remove that capability. If he asks again, tell him I'm unavailable. Indefinitely. He's going to find out eventually about the... Not from you, he's not. A pause. Right? The silence from Nia's end was 1 second too long. Nia. I haven't told him anything, Nia said quickly. I'm just saying, eventually... I'll handle eventually when it arrives. She pressed her thumb against the bridge of her nose. This is not something I'm figuring out right now. I'm figuring out too many other things right now. You're still seeing a doctor? Yes? She was. A physician in the city who made house calls to the estate on Tuesday mornings, sent by Min-jae without fanfare, introduced as available to you for the duration, as though it were a standard contractual provision, which apparently it now was. Okay, Nia said, and then softer. I'm sorry. I'm still sorry. I know. Amara lay back against the headboard. The ceiling of her room was plain and white and asked nothing of her. Stop letting the sorry eat you alive. It's not useful. Do something useful instead. Like what? Like not gambling. A sound from Nia that was almost a laugh and landed somewhere adjacent to it. Yeah, working on that. They talked for another 12 minutes about nothing that mattered. A television show Nia had been watching, a problem with the building's elevator, something their aunt had said at a family gathering Amara hadn't attended. The ordinary infrastructure of a life continuing without her. When she hung up, she held the phone against her chest for a moment in the dark. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. The thing with Ryu happened on a Sunday. She'd been accessing a database through the secure system Park had set up for her. Financial records, cross-referenced with property holdings in 2 counties. Standard work. She'd needed a secondary access key for a restricted layer and had sent the request through the internal system, as instructed. An hour later, Ryu appeared at her office door. Not Park. Ryu. He stood in the frame, wide, deliberate, taking up more of the doorway than strictly necessary. His expression was the same as always, neutral in the way that had a floor under it, something dense and unmoving below the surface. The access key you requested, he said. What for? She looked up from her screen. Property records, tied to the Mercer analysis I'm running. Which records specifically? She held his gaze. Park manages my access requests, not you. Park's not here. Then it waits until Park's back. Ryu's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. A slight drop in atmospheric pressure, the way air behaves before something abrupt. He stepped inside the doorway. Not all the way in, just enough to make the room feel like it had gotten smaller. The people Mr. Kong brings in, he said carefully, sometimes bring things in with them. Things. Interests. Connections. His eyes were fixed on her with the specific quality of someone who had been authorized to push and was curious where the wall was. People who are recently in difficult situations are sometimes motivated to resolve those situations in ways that create other difficulties. She set her pen down. Are you suggesting I'm a security risk? I'm noting that you came from a situation with substantial financial exposure, which Mr. Kong resolved as part of my contract. She kept her voice level with the specific effort of someone who knew that losing it would concede the point. If you have concerns about my security clearance, take them to Min-jae directly. I'll be in the room when you do. Ryu looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. She had spent 20 minutes the previous night reading everything she could find about the psychology of dominance communication in high-risk organizational environments, because she'd suspected something like this was coming, and she liked to be prepared. He left without another word. She counted to 30 after his footsteps faded, then got up, walked to the small bathroom attached to her office, ran cold water over both wrists, and breathed. Her hands were shaking. She was proud she'd waited until he was gone to notice. She told Min-jae about Ryu that evening. Not immediately, and not emotionally. She waited until their standard end-of-day debrief, a practice that had evolved organically, without being formally scheduled, until it simply existed as a thing that happened at 8 o'clock in his office. She had come to understand it as the most honest hour of his day, the point at which the performance requirements of running a criminal empire had sufficiently reduced that something more direct could surface. She laid out the interaction the way she'd write it in a report. Chronological, specific, no editorializing. Minji listened without movement. When she finished, he said, "He had no authorization to question you." "I assume not. I told him to raise concerns directly with you." "And if he'd pushed past that, then I'd have a different kind of report for you." She looked at him steadily. "I can manage people who are testing me. What I won't manage is people who've been authorized to obstruct me. So if that's the direction you're considering, it's not." His voice had a texture in it she hadn't heard before. Not anger, something more controlled than anger, but directly adjacent. "Ryu has concerns about any outsider in this house. Those concerns are professionally appropriate." A pause. "His method today was not." "What happens to the method?" "It gets corrected." She nodded, picked up her tea. "One more thing." He waited. "Whoever he thinks I might be passing information to, I want to know the name. Not because I want to be defensive about it, because if there's someone specific he's worried about, I want to know if they show up in my research." Min-jae looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as the specific look he wore when she did something that confirmed a decision he'd already made. "His concern is your ex-husband," he said. "Marcus Bennett. He had some professional contacts in an organization we have had previous—" He chose the word deliberately. "Friction with." The ginger cracker she'd been about to reach for stayed on the desk. "Marcus." She made herself breathe before she spoke. "Marcus Bennett is a structural engineer with a firm in Pasadena. He coaches youth basketball on weekends, and his most significant financial decision in the last 3 years was buying a timeshare in Scottsdale. That's accurate as far as it goes. What does it not cover?" Min-jae was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone measuring how much information was necessary versus how much was protective. 3 years ago, he said, Marcus Bennett consulted for a real estate development firm that was functioning as a financial front for an organization we had serious conflict with. We don't believe he understood the nature of the firm, but the connection exists, and Ryu is, another careful word selection, thorough. The room was very still. "You investigated my ex-husband," Amara said. "We investigated everyone connected to you before I made the offer. Including me. Extensively." She looked at the wall to the left of his face, not away from him, just slightly off-center, because she needed something in the room that wasn't looking back at her while she processed this. "And what did you find?" "That you were exactly what you presented, which is why you're here." A pause. "The concern about Marcus was in my assessment a low-probability risk. Ryu weights it higher. The disagreement is ongoing." "How ongoing?" "He'll continue watching you." "I know." She looked back at him directly. "That's fine. He can watch. He won't find anything." She picked up her tea now. "But tell him to knock next time." Minji held her gaze. And then, small, brief, the restraint of a man who didn't allow himself many of them, he almost smiled. "I'll pass it along," he said. "Well, the call from Nia came at 11:43 on a Wednesday night, 6 weeks into Amara's contract. Not a regular call. The tone was the tell. 2 rings, a hang-up, 3 rings. The pattern they'd agreed on in childhood for actual emergency, deployed only 3 times in Amara's memory. Their mother's stroke, Nia's car accident, and the night their apartment flooded. Amara was awake. She picked up before the 3rd ring completed. "Nia." "There are men outside my building." Nia's voice was controlled in the way that meant she was working extremely hard to keep it that way, which was somehow worse than if she'd been panicking. "2 of them. I noticed the same car yesterday and I thought I was being paranoid, but it's been 4 hours and they haven't moved, and one of them got out to make a call, and he was looking up at my window while he did it. Amara was already standing. Did they try to contact you?" "No." "Have you left the apartment?" "No. I went to the window and then I stepped back and I've just been..." A breath. "Amara, I don't know what to..." "Lock every door. Don't go near windows. Call your building's front desk and tell them there's suspicious activity outside. Get it documented." She was moving to the door of her room. "I'll call you back in 5 minutes." She went down the hall. It was 11:43 and the house was supposed to be in its quieter register by now, but there was a light under the door of Min Jae's office, which had stopped surprising her around week 4. She knocked once and opened the door. He looked up from whatever was in front of him, took in her face in the way someone does when they've learned to read people efficiently. "Naya," he said, men outside her building, stationary for hours, watching her window. He reached for his phone. Not urgency, precision. 2 calls in rapid succession, Korean. Too fast for her to parse the words. He set the phone down after the second call and looked at her. "Someone will be there in 20 minutes. "Are they yours?" "The men outside her building?" "No." His jaw was set. "Which means someone has been watching your sister since before you came here, which means someone anticipated this arrangement." The cold that moved through her then was different from any of the cold she'd felt in the previous 6 weeks. This wasn't the cold of a difficult situation. This was the cold of understanding, fully, and for the first time, that she had not just stepped into a complicated job. She had stepped into a conflict that had already been planned around her. "Whoever sent Daniel Cho," she said. "Yes. They're not just mapping your operations." She held his gaze. "They're mapping your vulnerabilities. They moved to Nia because they've already assessed that she's the pressure point." Min Jae was very still. "Which means they know about me," Amara said. "They know what I'm doing here. They know enough about your operations to understand that I've already changed something." Her voice was steady. She was functioning in the part of her brain that treated crisis as data, which was the part that had kept her employed for 4 years in jobs that required it. Someone inside this house told them. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd heard since she arrived. Min Jae stood. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood with both hands flat on the desk and looked at a point on the wall, and whatever was happening behind his eyes was compressed and dense and not available for observation. Then he looked at her. "Pack a bag for your sister," he said. "She's coming here tonight." "And the person inside, I'll handle it." The tone of those 3 words was the first time since she'd arrived that she'd heard something in his voice that she understood as genuinely dangerous. Not performed authority, not managed power, but the flat and final sound of a man who had just identified a problem and knew exactly what solving it would require. Amara had spent 6 weeks watching him manage risk with precision and patience. She had cataloged the careful, methodical nature of how he operated. This was different. She picked up her phone to call Nia back, and as she dialed, she understood, with the specific clarity of something arriving too late to be avoided, that the arrangement she'd agreed to, the careful professional distance she'd maintained, the clean contractual boundaries she'd drawn between her life and his, all of it had just become something else entirely. There was no version of tonight that let her step back across that line. Nia arrived at the estate at 12:51 in the morning. She came with a duffel bag that was too small for what she'd packed, clothes spilling out of the half-open zipper, a phone charger wrapped around a toiletry bag like an afterthought, one shoe visible through the mesh side pocket, and no indication of where the other one was. Her hair was loose, uncombed, and she had a look on her face that Amara recognized from the 3 worst nights of their shared childhood, the absolute absence of performance, the face a person makes when they've burned through all available pretense and arrived at something raw underneath. Amara met her at the door. Nia saw her and said nothing, just walked into her arms and stood there, and Amara held her the way she had when Nia was 16, and their mother had said the particular cruel thing that only mothers know how to say, the one that found the exact crack and drove itself in. She held her sister the way you hold someone when you don't have words adequate to the situation and you've stopped pretending you might. "They still there?" Amara asked over Nia's shoulder. "They left about 10 minutes after Min Jae's people showed up." Nia pulled back. Her eyes were dry, which was worse somehow than if she'd been crying. "There were 3 of his. The 2 outside just drove away." "Did anyone approach you? Try to contact you before you left?" "No, nothing. That's what scared me most. They didn't want anything. They were just watching." "Come inside." Park had prepared a room on the ground floor, smaller than Amara's, but clean and warm, with a lamp already on and a glass of water on the nightstand. Small acts of readiness that Amara was starting to understand as the house's particular language of care, not stated, just done. Nia stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly, taking in the dimensions of it, the height of the ceiling, the quality of the furniture. It was the first time she'd seen where Amara had landed. "This is where you've been," she said. "Yes." "It's not what I—" She stopped. "I don't know what I thought." "You thought it would look more like a threat." Nia sat on the edge of the bed. "Doesn't it?" Amara sat in the chair across from her. "What it looks like and what it is are two different things. I'm still learning the difference." "That's not reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be honest." Nia looked at her hands. "Who were those men outside my building?" "We don't know yet." "But Minjae has a guess." "He has more than a guess." Amara watched her sister's face. "Nia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me without the version of the truth you think I want to hear. The actual truth." Nia looked up. "Is there anything else? Anything you haven't told me? Any other debts, any other contacts, any other connection to someone who might have a reason to use you as leverage against anyone?" She paused. "Against me." The silence was 3 seconds. In Amara's experience, honest answers took 1 second, 2 at most. "No," Nia said. 4 seconds had passed by then. Amara held her sister's gaze and said nothing, because sometimes the space after a lie needed to be inhabited rather than filled. Nia looked away first. "Go to sleep," Amara said. "We'll talk in the morning." What? She found Minjae in the security room, which she hadn't known existed until Park led her there at 1:15 in the morning through a door at the back of the east corridor that she'd categorized in her mental map of the house as a supply closet. It was not a supply closet. It was a room with 6 screens and a console that looked like it had been installed by people who took redundancy seriously, and Minjae was standing in front of 3 of the screens with Ryu to his left, and another man she hadn't seen before to his right, and all of them were looking at footage that was clearly from the exterior of Nia's building in the city. They'd had cameras on Nia's building, not tonight, before tonight. She walked in and no one reacted, which meant they'd known she was coming, which meant the corridor had cameras too. She filed that away. "How long have you had eyes on her building?" Amara said. Minjae didn't turn immediately. He was looking at something specific on the rightmost screen, the frozen image of a man standing beside a car, caught in the yellow-orange of a streetlight. His face was partially turned, not fully identifiable, not fully not. "Since you signed the contract," he said, "you told me Nia's situation was resolved. Her debt was resolved." He turned now. His face had the compressed quality she'd seen briefly in his office earlier, the surface held flat by effort, something pressurized beneath. "I didn't tell you I'd stopped watching." She took a breath through her nose, held it, released it. "That's a meaningful distinction that you deliberately didn't surface." "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I'd told you I was monitoring your sister's location and contacts, you would have objected." "I'm objecting now." "I know." He held her gaze. "I also knew that 6 weeks ago you hadn't yet understood what kind of operation you'd stepped into. You understand it better now." A pause. "The surveillance on Nia identified anomalous contact activity starting 3 weeks ago. Someone began making inquiries around her. Indirect ones, questions to neighbors, a building management inquiry using a false name. Whoever sent Daniel Cho moved faster than I anticipated. 3 weeks. The number landed wrong. You've been watching this for 3 weeks and you didn't tell me. I was tracking the source. While my sister was being circled. While I was identifying who was circling her, which is different." His voice was even, which made her want to put something through the nearest screen. "If I told you 3 weeks ago, you'd have pulled her out immediately. That would have told them we'd identified their surveillance, and we would have lost the thread. So you used her as bait." "I used the situation to gather intelligence." He didn't soften it, and she appreciated that he didn't try to, even though it made her want to say something she couldn't take back. "She was never in danger during that period. My people were on the building." "She didn't know that." "No." "She's been living for 3 weeks not knowing she was being watched by 2 sets of people and you made that decision for her." "Yes." Flat, uncomplicated. The admission of a man who had weighed the calculation and reached a conclusion and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I made that decision. If it cost you something, that's real. But the alternative was less information and more risk. Amara stood in the blue-white light of 6 screens and felt the specific anger of someone who has just discovered they've been logically outmaneuvered in a situation where logic was not the point. She wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong. Those two facts could apparently occupy the same room. "Who's the man in the image?" she said, pointing at the frozen frame. Min-jae turned back to the screen. "That's what we're working on." The identification came at 4 in the morning, and it didn't come from the screens. It came from Amara. She'd gone back to her room at 2, ostensibly to sleep, and had instead opened her laptop and started pulling threads in the way she did when her brain refused to disengage. Methodical, database by database, cross-referencing the partial face from the screen with every professional photograph she'd cataloged over 6 weeks of research into the West Coast organizational landscape. She found him at 3:47. His name was Calvin Reese. He was a facilities manager for a property development firm in Pasadena. He had a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot that matched the angle and the jaw and the particular set of the shoulders in the streetlight photograph with an 89% confidence she was willing to call 100. He worked for the same Pasadena firm that Marcus had consulted for 3 years ago. She sat with that for 1 minute and 13 seconds by the clock on her laptop screen. She counted them because she needed something to do with the 60 seconds it took her to make sure she was reading what she was actually reading and not what her exhausted and 8 weeks further along brain wanted to construct out of coincidence and pattern recognition. Then she called Min-jae's direct line. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. "Calvin Reese," she said, "Pasadena. He's connected to the firm Marcus consulted for." A silence on the line that was different from his usual ones. "Send me what you have," he said. "Already done." She'd emailed it while the phone was ringing. "Go to sleep, Amara." "I'm not going to sleep." "I know. Go try anyway." She didn't, but she closed the laptop and lay on top of the covers with her shoes still on and her hand resting below her ribs. Where sometimes, now, she thought she could feel something. Not movement yet, too early for that, just the awareness of an occupancy that hadn't been there before. A presence that was making itself known in the particular way of things that couldn't be reasoned with. She thought about Marcus, about the timeshare in Scottsdale and the youth basketball, and the way he'd held her hand in the fertility clinic 3 years ago and cried in the parking lot after the second failed round, real tears, the kind she'd never doubted. About the look on his face in the lawyer's office when he signed the papers. Grief, yes, but also something else underneath it that she'd been too exhausted to name at the time. Now she thought she had a name for it. She thought it was relief. None. The morning broke without ceremony. Nia slept until 9. Min-jae was gone before 7. "A meeting in the city," Park said, without elaboration. Amara ate toast in the kitchen with Mrs. O moving around her in the efficient, self-contained orbit of a woman who had learned to operate as if the people at her table were weather, present, variable, not her responsibility to interpret. Ryu came in at 8:15. He poured coffee, did not look at Amara, poured a second cup without being asked, and set it beside her plate. She looked at the cup, looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He went back to standing in his doorway. It wasn't an apology, it was a recalibration, the specific gesture of a man who had reassessed a threat level and was adjusting his posture accordingly. She understood it. She accepted the coffee. When Nia appeared, hair unbrushed, one of Amara's sweaters pulled over her own clothes, she stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at Ryu with the expression of someone who was trying to determine whether the large, unfamiliar man in the room was a threat or a fixture. "That's Ryu," Amara said. "He works for Min-jae. He's fine." Ryu did not confirm or deny this characterization. He drank his coffee. Nia sat down. Mrs. O put a plate in front of her without being asked. "Did you sleep?" Amara said. "Enough." Nia picked up a fork, set it down. "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" "Probably not, but ask anyway." "Do you trust him?" "Min-jae." Amara looked at her coffee cup. "I trust his calculations." "That's not the same as trust." "I know." "Do you trust him as a person?" A longer pause. The ventilation hum. Ryu's coffee cup setting back down on the counter, Mrs. O moving something from one side of the stove to the other. "I trust that he does what he calculates is necessary," Amara said. "I trust that he's been honest with me about what he is." I trust that when he makes a decision I don't agree with, he can articulate the reasoning. She looked up. For where I am right now, that's enough to work with. He's a criminal, Amara. I know what he is. So do I. And so do the people who are watching my building. Nia's voice had an edge in it. Not accusation exactly, more the sound of something that had been kept in reasonable containment overnight and was now applying pressure on the walls. You signed a contract with a man who runs illegal businesses, and now there are people using me to get to you, and we're both living in his house. My contract is legitimate. The work I'm doing is legal. The work you're doing is for someone who, yes, Amara cut her off clean, for someone who exists in a world where this kind of thing happens. I knew that when I signed. You knew that when you borrowed money from people who charged you interest in ways that don't appear on any official document. She held her sister's gaze. We're both here because of decisions. Mine was made with more information than yours. That doesn't make it clean, but it does make it mine. Nia was quiet for a long time. She picked up the fork again, put food in her mouth and chewed and looked at the table. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, stripped of the arguing quality, arriving at something underneath. I think Marcus knows, she said. The kitchen sound continued around them. Mrs. O. The ventilation. Ryu's careful stillness. Knows what? Amara said, though the cold that moved through her suggested she already knew which answer was coming. About the baby. Amara set down her coffee cup very carefully, because if she didn't do it carefully, she would do it the other way. I need you to tell me exactly what that means, she said. It came out differently this time, not in fragments, in a single compressed confession that Nia had clearly been holding since before she arrived the previous night, maybe before the men outside the building, maybe since the Thursday phone call when she'd said he's going to find out eventually, and paused 1 second too long when Amara asked if she'd told him anything. She hadn't told him about the pregnancy directly. She'd told her friend Keisha, who had told her boyfriend, whose brother was a mutual contact of Marcus's from the time when Amara and Marcus had still existed in overlapping social geography. Nia. Amara's voice had gone somewhere she didn't recognize, past calm, past anger, into a register that was quiet the way a room is quiet after something loud has happened in it. Keisha. I needed to tell someone. I was scared and you needed to keep your mouth shut. Not raised, not broken, just the truth laid flat like something you dropped and weren't going to pick up and throw. I told you specifically. I told you it wasn't information to share. I told you I would handle it. I know. And you told Keisha. I'm sorry. Keisha? Keisha who tells her boyfriend, who tells his brother, who is somehow connected to the same Pasadena firm that is apparently connected to the people who were watching your building. Amara stood up. The chair made a sound on the floor. Ryu straightened slightly in the periphery. Nia, think about what I just said to you. Think about the sequence of that. Nia's face went white, not dramatically. Slowly, the color leaving like heat leaving a room when the door opens in winter. That's not, she started. I don't know what it is yet. Amara walked to the window. She needed to not be at the table for a moment. She put both hands on the counter and looked at the backgrounds. The managed landscape, the eucalyptus line in the distance, the gray morning light that was making everything look like a photograph of itself rather than the actual thing. But I know that Marcus finding out about the pregnancy through your social chain and Marcus's old employer being connected to Calvin Reese, who was watching your building, are two facts that exist in the same universe. Whether they connect or not, I don't know yet. You think Marcus is involved in this? I don't know. He wouldn't. I don't know. She turned from the window. And I need to know. Before I can know anything else, I need to know that. She looked at her sister. This woman she loved in the complicated, load-bearing way you love someone who has cost you things and will probably cost you more. I need you to stop talking to Keisha, to anyone. I need you to treat everything that happens in this house and everything you know about my situation as if it were classified. Can you do that? Nia nodded. Something in her face had cracked open. Not tears, not yet, but the preliminary condition of them. Say it, Amara said. Yes. I can do that. Okay. Amara picked up her phone. Okay. She had the full Marcus Bennett file compiled by noon. Not the basic version. She'd built that on the first night at the estate as part of her standard intake process, the habit of a researcher who applies the same rigor to her own situation as to professional assignments. The full version was what she built now. 4 hours of focused extraction from every legally accessible database she had clearance to access, layered against property records, financial statements, corporate filings, and the organizational map she'd been building for 6 weeks of the West Coast network they were now apparently tangled with. Marcus Bennett had been paid by the Pasadena firm on 3 separate occasions over 14 months, 3 years ago. Consulting fees, architectural assessments, legitimate on the face of it, except that 2 of the 3 projects he'd consulted on had never been built. The properties existed, she found them in county records, but they'd sat empty since acquisition, their permits applied for and never completed, their files flagged for a zoning irregularity that had been quietly unresolved for 31 months. She knew what that pattern looked like. She'd seen it twice before in her professional work. Properties acquired, used briefly for purposes the permits didn't describe, and then left to sit as placeholders in a larger organizational ledger. Marcus had walked through those properties, written reports about them. Whatever his level of understanding, he had provided the professional legitimacy that made the paper trail coherent. She sat with this for a long time. She thought about the parking lot outside the fertility clinic, the real tears, the way he'd held her hand. She thought about the divorce papers and his signature and the look she now understood as relief, and asked herself, relief from what? Relief from a failing marriage, yes, but also, possibly, maybe, the beginning of what she had to treat as a real question. Relief from proximity. From a wife who was professionally trained to notice the things that didn't add up. She printed nothing. She saved everything to an encrypted drive and put the drive in the interior pocket of her jacket and kept it there. Then she went to find Min Jai. I was back by 2 in the afternoon, and he looked like the city had required something from him. Not disheveled. He was never disheveled. But there was a quality of compression around his eyes and jaw that came from a morning of managed situations, and he was still in his coat when she found him in the corridor. "I need an hour," she said. He looked at her face, read it in the efficient way she was used to from him. "Office," he said, and turned. She gave him 10 minutes to get settled, an understanding she'd developed organically, the recognition that he needed transition time between outside and inside, that there was a seam between his 2 operational modes that required a moment to close. Then she knocked. She laid out everything she'd found in the same format as all her previous reports. Sequential, documented, source attributed. She didn't lead with the conclusion. She let the chain speak. He read more slowly this time. That was information in itself. When he finished, he set the last page down and was still for a long moment. "The zoning irregularity on the Crenshaw property," he said. "That's one of ours." The cold in her chest was becoming a familiar companion. "One of yours." "A former operation, discontinued 18 months ago." He looked up from the pages. "We don't use those properties. We haven't used them." A pause. "But someone else has been using the dormancy of our former footprint to run parallel activity, and hiring consultants who could provide professional cover." "Yes." She looked at him directly. "Then Marcus wasn't just connected to the organization that's targeting you. He was providing services for operations that were running inside your former infrastructure without your knowledge." The silence that followed was different from his other silences. This one had mass. "Someone has been operating inside my blind spot," he said, "using the shape of what I used to be as a container for what they're building. For how long?" "That's the question." He stood, went to the window. She watched his back, the stillness of it, the effort of it. If they've been inside the dormant structure for 18 months, they've had time to understand it. They know the old roots, the old contacts, the old vulnerabilities. He turned. "They've been building a case. Or a replacement." His jaw tightened. "Yes. If they replace the structure from the inside, Basi," Amara said, "they don't need to fight you for territory. They become the territory. They use the existing relationships, the existing fear, the existing reputation, and they do it as you." She paused. "While leaving you exposed as the criminal of record for everything they've done inside your own former operation." She watched his face absorb this, watched the calculation happen, fast, because he was fast, But this was a large calculation, and it required the full machinery. "Where is your ex-husband right now?" he said. "His office. He had a meeting at 11, according to his firm's public calendar." Min-jae looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled assessment, not the almost smile, not the compressed anger. Something more exposed. The expression of a man who has just understood that the problem is larger than he'd designed his defenses for. "Amara." He said her name carefully, like weight on a surface he wasn't certain of. "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "Is it possible that your divorce was not a coincidence?" The room was very quiet. She'd thought about this. On the drive over from the corridor in the 30 seconds between knocking on the door and hearing him say, "Come in," she'd thought about it and put it in a box and left the box closed because she needed to be functional for this conversation. And if she opened the box, she wasn't sure she'd be functional. "You're asking if Marcus left me," she said, "because he knew you were going to make me an offer." "I'm asking if someone who knew I was going to need a particular kind of researcher encouraged the conditions that would make you available." She was standing very still. She could feel her own heartbeat, not racing, just present, with the particular insistence of a body reminding a brain that it exists in flesh and not only in information. "The fertility treatments," she said. "They were his idea. He pushed for them." "Yes." "And when they stopped working, he—" She stopped. The thing she'd called grief in that parking lot. The real tears. "He started pulling away 6 months before he asked for the divorce. I thought it was the stress of the treatments. I thought it was—" "Someone may have told him it wasn't working," Min-jae said. "The fertility treatments. Someone may have told him before you knew, given him time to prepare the next step." She felt something in her chest that she didn't have a word for. Not a feeling with a clean name, more like the structural failure of a load-bearing assumption. The sensation of a floor you'd trusted taking on a sound it wasn't supposed to make. "They would need access to medical records," she said. "Illegal access." "Yes." "Which means they had someone inside. A clinic contact." She heard her own voice, steady, professional, working. The part of her brain that treated crisis as data was running at full capacity, and she was grateful for it, and she also understood that at some point the other part was going to catch up, and she was going to need to be somewhere private when it did. "This has been building for more than 3 years." "Yes." "Before you approached Nia about the debt." "It appears so." "They created the debt, or they created the conditions for it." She looked at him. "Nia didn't just fall into gambling. She was guided there." Min-jae said nothing. His silence was its own confirmation. "They made me available," Amara said, "and then they made sure you'd notice me, and then they waited to see what you'd do with the opportunity." She felt the full geometric shape of it resolving, ugly and precise, the kind of plan that required patience and resources and genuine contempt for the people it moved around a board like pieces. "I'm not your researcher, I'm their insertion." "You're not their anything." His voice was sharp, sharper than she'd heard it. "You made your own choices. They created conditions, not outcomes." Min-jae, she said his name the way she said the names of facts she didn't like. "If everything I've just told you is accurate, if my marriage, my sister's debt, my availability, and my proximity to you were all manufactured by the same organization, then every piece of intelligence I've generated for you over the past 6 weeks needs to be re-examined, because I don't know which of my analytical instincts have been shaped by information they wanted me to find." The silence was the longest yet. She watched his face work through it, watched the man who controlled criminal enterprises across 3 states arrive at the same conclusion she had 30 seconds before, that the most dangerous person in his house right now wasn't an enemy agent or a mole or a planted operative. It was a woman who had been used without her knowledge and was now sitting across from him with the full understanding of what had been done to her and the professional capacity to see every implication. She was the breach. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because they'd built her to be. "There's something else," she said. He waited. She put her hand on not the small private gesture she made alone, but deliberately, in front of him, because what she was about to say required him to understand the full weight of what was at stake. "If they've been monitoring my medical situation," she said, "they know about the pregnancy, which means they know what I am to you now isn't just a researcher." She held his eyes. "They know you have a reason to make decisions that aren't purely strategic, And that makes me more dangerous to you, not less. Min-jae looked at her hand on her stomach, looked at her face. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like someone who didn't know what to do next. That scared her more than anything else that had happened in the last 18 hours. More than the men outside Nia's building, more than Calvin Reese's face in the streetlight, more than the collapsed geography of her marriage. The man who feared nothing, who calculated everything, who had run a criminal empire on the West Coast with the cold precision of a machine, that man was standing in front of her looking at a problem he hadn't built a solution for. And the door to his office opened. Ryu. His face had the specific quality of a man delivering information he'd verified twice because he needed to be certain before he said it out loud. The mountain residence in South Korea, Ryu said. Someone accessed the property records this afternoon. Detailed access, floor plans, security assessments, everything that was filed during the renovation. He looked between them. Someone is already preparing the next move. Min-jae turned back to Amara. She understood what he was about to say before he said it. We leave tonight, he said. They left at 11:40 that night. No announcement. No visible preparation that would read as departure to anyone watching the property feed from outside. Park had managed the logistics in the 3 hours between Min-jae's decision and the cars pulling around to the east side of the estate, the side without line of sight to the main road, with the specific efficiency of a man who had done this before and understood that speed and discretion were not the same thing, and you needed both. Amara packed in 8 minutes. She'd been a light packer since her mid-20s, a habit from field work that her marriage had briefly interrupted and her current situation had restored. 2 bags. Laptop. Encrypted drive in the interior jacket pocket. She stood in her room for 30 seconds after the second bag was zipped and looked at the space she'd occupied for 6 weeks. The east-facing windows, the desk lamp, the chair she'd sat in every morning with her coffee before the house woke up around her, and felt something she didn't examine closely because examining it would slow her down. She went to get Nia. Her sister was already packed, which told Amara that Park had briefed her, which told Amara that Min-jae had made a decision about Nia's inclusion in this departure without consulting her. She filed that too, because there was a conversation waiting on the other side of this night about the precise boundaries of decision-making authority over her own sister, and she would have it when they weren't moving. Where are we going? Nia said. South Korea. Nia looked at her. I know, Amara said. Amara, I know. Come on. There were 2 vehicles, Amara and Nia in the first with Park driving, and one of Min-jae's men in the front passenger seat. Min-jae and Ryu in the second. The vehicles left the estate 4 minutes apart by different routes, a precaution that Amara understood intellectually and that made her chest tight anyway, because the 4 minutes between cars was 4 minutes in which anything could happen to either of them, and neither would know. They took surface streets for the first 20 minutes. No highway. Highways had choke points, predictable geometry, limited exit options. She knew enough now to understand why. She sat in the back seat with Nia pressed against her left side and watched the city pass in the particular way a city looks at midnight when you're leaving it, lit and indifferent, going on without you. Are you scared? Nia said quietly. Yes. You don't look it. I'm very good at not looking it. Nia took her hand. Amara let her. The private airfield was 40 minutes south of the city. Not LAX, not Burbank, something smaller and institutional, and equipped with a hangar that had nothing on the outside to indicate what it contained. The plane inside was a mid-sized private jet, white, no visible markings. 2 pilots already in position. Ground crew moving with the purposeful brevity of people who worked on other people's urgency and had learned not to ask questions about it. Min-jae was there when their vehicle arrived. He'd taken a different route and arrived first. I was standing on the tarmac in the dark with Ryu at his shoulder, and he looked at Amara when she got out of the car with the specific direct quality that she'd come to understand as his version of checking whether she was all right. Not a question he'd ask in front of people, just a look that asked it. She gave him a short nod. She was all right. She was operational. He turned toward the plane. They were in the air by 12:20. The flight was 14 hours. Amara slept for 4 of them. Not restful sleep, the shallow, vigilant kind that leaves you more tired than rested, but is better than nothing. When your body is running on adrenaline and crackers and the particular fuel of having spent the last 12 hours discovering that your life had been arranged without your knowledge by people you'd never met. She woke to Nia asleep against her shoulder, mouth slightly open, the dignified unconsciousness of someone who had finally burned through all available anxiety and collapsed into whatever was underneath it. Minjae was across the aisle, awake, reading something on a tablet with the focused stillness of a man using work to manage what couldn't otherwise be managed. He looked up when she shifted, looked back at the tablet. "There's food," he said. "I know." She got up carefully, extracting herself from Nia's weight, and went to the small galley at the rear of the cabin. The selection was deliberate and specific: ginger cookies, crackers, bland things that a person in the second trimester could tolerate without negotiation. She stood eating crackers over the sink and thought about the 5,000 miles of Pacific Ocean beneath them, and the fact that she was on a plane to a country she'd never been to, with a man who ran criminal operations, and her sister who had accidentally detonated both their lives. And she thought, this is the sequence of decisions that brought you here, and every one of them was yours, even the ones that were made without you. She went back to her seat. Minjae looked up again. "Tell me about the mountain residence," she said. "Jeju, a property I've had for 6 years. Off-register, so the county records were updated 2 years ago under a holding company that doesn't connect to my name on the primary layer. Someone had to dig for it." He set the tablet down. "Which means they've been digging for longer than the Cho approach, longer than the surveillance on your sister. This has been a sustained intelligence operation against my entire infrastructure. How many properties do you have that could be similarly exposed?" "Ryu is assessing. We'll have a count by morning." "And the mountain residents, current security?" "A team of 4 on rotation, enhanced since Ryu made the call 3 hours ago." He looked at his hands for a moment, a rare gesture, the looking at hands that indicated the internal machinery was moving faster than the external composure. "The Jeju property isn't a fortress. It was designed for privacy, not for active threat. I'm having that addressed." "Address it faster," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not trying to tell you how to run your security operation," she said. "I'm telling you that someone who has been planning this for 3 years is not going to wait until we're comfortable." "I know." "Do you know, or do you know, and are telling yourself you have more time than you do because the alternative is accepting that you're already behind?" A pause, long enough to be an answer. "We're already behind," he said. "Okay." She looked at the dark window. Nothing outside but altitude and darkness. "Then we work with that. What's the fastest version of getting ahead?" He studied her profile. "You should be sleeping." "I was sleeping. Now I'm working. What's the fastest version of getting ahead?" He was quiet for a moment, but it was the productive kind of quiet, the kind that preceded something real. "Marcus," he said. "He's the live thread. Everything we've traced converges on the Pasadena operation, and Marcus is the only connection to that operation who doesn't know we've identified him. You want to use him. I want to know what he knows. There's a difference." "Not necessarily." She turned from the window. "He may know everything. He may know almost nothing. He may be exactly what I thought he was. A structural engineer who got paid to walk through buildings he didn't understand and has no idea what he walked into." She paused. "Or he's been informed enough to be useful to them and ignorant enough to be expendable, which is the most dangerous version, because a man who knows he's expendable will do things a man with options won't." "Who does he think you are right now?" "The woman who divorced him, who disappeared." She felt the weight of it, simple and enormous. "He doesn't know where I am." "No. But they do. If they created the conditions of our arrangement, they've been watching it develop. They know I'm on this plane." Minjae picked up his tablet, set it back down. "Yes." The word landed in the cabin between them and sat there. They didn't sleep again. Jeju Island at 4 in the afternoon was green and gray and larger than she'd expected, the scale of it not quite matching the word island, which her mind had assembled as something smaller and more contained. The mountain residence was north of the coast, 20 minutes on private road from the nearest village, and it occupied a hillside the way things occupy hillsides when they've been built to disappear into them. Stone and dark wood, horizontal lines, windows that watched the valley below, with the patience of something that had been waiting there a long time. 4 men outside when they arrived. 2 visible, two positioned where she couldn't see them, which she found appropriate. Ryu did a perimeter circuit in the first 10 minutes with the thoroughness of a man who didn't believe in second-hand assessments. She stood on the covered entry while Min-jae spoke Korean with the team lead, fast, specific, the rhythm of people exchanging precise information rather than having a conversation, and watched the valley below and thought about what a person with resources and planning would do next. They'd access the property records. That was reconnaissance, not action. Reconnaissance preceded action by the amount of time it took to move people and resources into position. Given that the records had been accessed that afternoon, given that they were now several hours out from that point, given the flight time and the logistics. They could already be here, she said. Min-jae stopped mid-sentence, looked at her. The reconnaissance was this afternoon, she said. But if they've had eyes on your operation for months, they may have had people on Jeju before the record access. The record access may not be preparation, it may be confirmation. They may have confirmed our destination and signaled people already in position. The team lead was looking between them. Min-jae said something sharp in Korean. The team lead was on a radio before he finished speaking. Get inside, Min-jae said to Amara. I need to be inside. He said it the way he said things when they weren't a recommendation. Both of you. Nia was already moving. Amara followed because picking this particular moment to establish independence was not tactically sound. The interior of the residence was warm in the way that stone buildings retain warmth. Slowly, stubbornly, the heat held in the walls rather than in the air. The team lead had been through the interior before their arrival. Every room had been cleared, every window shutter assessed for sightlines. The kitchen had been stocked. The generator had been tested. Nia sat at the kitchen table and didn't say anything. She'd been doing that for the last 6 hours, present, quiet, occupying her own particular silence with the look of someone processing a quantity of information that exceeded her available processing capacity. Amara understood it. She let it be. She set up her laptop on the table in his main room, the room with the valley-facing windows, now shuttered, and went back to the encrypted drive. There was more to extract. There was always more to extract when you knew what you were looking for, and now she knew what she was looking for. The full organizational map of whoever had spent 3 years building a shadow version of Kang Min-jae's empire inside the hollowed-out structure of his former operations. She worked for 2 hours. Min-jae came in once, looked at her screen without comment, left. Ryu came in once, looked at her without looking at the screen, left. Neither of them told her to stop. What she built over those 2 hours was not complete. It couldn't be complete without access to information she didn't legally have clearance to reach, but it was coherent, a shape, the outline of an organization that had been methodical, patient, and very well funded. An organization that had spent 3 years running operations under cover of Min-jae's former infrastructure, generating revenue that was attributed, on whatever record trail existed, to Kang Min-jae's criminal enterprise. Building a case, a documented case with evidence trails and financial records and professional assessments signed by a structural engineer in Pasadena. A case that, if submitted to the right authorities, would dismantle Kang Min-jae completely, destroy everything he'd built, legal and illegal, remove him from the board, and leave them standing in the space he'd occupied. She saved everything, put the drive back in her pocket, went to find Min-jae. I was in the room at the back of the residence that Ryu had designated as the operational center. Bare table, 2 laptops, a whiteboard someone had brought in from somewhere. He was standing at the whiteboard with a marker and a series of names connected by lines that she recognized as a version of the same map she'd just built. He'd arrived at much of it through different means. She looked at his version. He looked at hers on the tablet she handed him. Same organization, she said. Same structure. He pointed at 3 names on the whiteboard. These I couldn't place. You have them? She looked. Middle one, yes. He's a financial intermediary, Vancouver-based. I have 3 transactions. Outer 2 I haven't seen. They're internal security. Their function is making problems disappear. She absorbed that. How many problems have they made disappear? At least 2 that I can confirm. He said it without emphasis. The way a person says true things that have stopped surprising them. And Marcus. He's not on my board. He's on mine. She pointed at a position on the map she'd built. He's a bridge, not internal. He doesn't know the full structure, but he's been used as a connector between the organizational layer and the legitimate paper trail. They used his professional credentials to legitimize the property assessments, which means he's the most legible thread, the one that reads clearly in a legal context. He's also the most exposed. Min-jae looked at her directly. If someone in that organization decides he's a liability, then he becomes one of the problems the outer two make disappear. She said it flat, without the feeling that was underneath it, because the feeling was complicated and she needed to be clear right now. I know. He studied her face. You need to decide something. I know that too. Whatever Marcus knew or didn't know, whatever role he played, whatever was done to your marriage. He paused, each word placed with care. You have to decide how much that affects what you're willing to do next. The answer was already there. It had been there since the plane. It doesn't affect it, she said. He's a thread that needs to be pulled. Whatever we find when we pull it is what we find. Protecting myself from difficult information is not a luxury I can afford right now. Min-jae held her gaze for a moment. All right, he said. The first shot came through the east-facing shuttered window at 9:47 that evening. Not a bullet, a projectile. Small, fast, something that punched through the wooden shutter and hit the wall above the whiteboard and dropped to the floor. Amara registered the sound. Sharp, compressed. The particular crack of something moving very fast through something that slowed it before she understood what it was. Ryu was already moving. He had Amara by the arm, and Min-jae was down behind the table before she'd fully processed the direction of the sound. And Ryu was calling something in Korean that she parsed from tone as positions. Report even without the vocabulary. Get down, Min-jae said, and he was beside her behind the overturned table, his hand on her back. Not gripping, just present. The specific contact of someone marking that you're there and intact. And his jaw was set and his eyes were scanning the room with the rapid, systematic quality of a man counting resources under pressure. That wasn't a bullet, she said, because she needed to be sure. No, tracking device. They wanted us to know they know we're here. His voice was level with the same effort she'd observed in herself. The application of control as a tool rather than a feeling. They're not here to take the house. Then what? They want to negotiate from a position of demonstrated reach. His jaw tightened. They want me to make a call. The radio on the table, the operational frequency for the security team, crackled. Ryu answered, Korean rapid exchange. He looked at Min-jae, said something short. Min-jae closed his eyes for 2 seconds, opened them. 2 of our perimeter team are down, non-lethal. They were precise about it. They want you functional, Amara said. You can't negotiate if you're compromised. Yes. Which means they're ready right now. They have the people in position to take this further if you don't respond. She looked at him. What do they want? They'll say they want me to cede control of the remaining operational infrastructure. Sign off on the transition. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard before. Not fear, not exactly, but the cousin of it that comes from understanding your position clearly. But what they actually want is the documentation. Everything I have on their organization inside mine. They can't complete the transition if there are records that expose the whole construction. Records that don't exist in their system because they were careful. But that exists in yours. He looked at her. You built that map tonight. The encrypted drive in her pocket. She became aware of it with the specific awareness of something that had just changed in categorical weight. If I hand them that drive, she said, they have everything they need to complete the transition, and you have no leverage. Yes. If you don't negotiate, they escalate. Yes. How far can they escalate before you can't protect? She stopped, adjusted. Before the people in this house are in genuine danger. He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Min-jae. I have resources I haven't deployed, he said. People I can call who are not connected to the exposed infrastructure. But calling them takes time, and they... He stopped. The radio crackled again. Ryu said one word. Min-jae stood up from behind the table. Amara grabbed his arm. What did he say? He looked at her with the expression she'd feared she'd see since she understood the full shape of what they were dealing with. The expression of a man who has just been handed the specific leverage that changes everything. They have Marcus, he said. The call came through on Min Jae's personal line at 10:15. He took it on speaker. His decision, not hers. But she understood it. She was the relevant party, and managing information flow right now was not a priority he could afford. The voice on the other end was American. West Coast accent, the flattened vowels of somewhere between LA and the Bay. Calm in the way of people who are calm because they've arranged the situation to make calm easy. Mr. Kang, thank you for picking up. Talk, Min Jae said. We have Mr. Bennett. He's not harmed. He's going to stay not harmed as long as tonight goes smoothly. A brief pause. Theatrical, calibrated. We'd like the analytical work product generated by your researcher over the past 6 weeks. The full archive. And we'd like you to make 3 specific calls. I'll provide the names. Who will confirm the transition of the outstanding operational contracts. In exchange, Marcus Bennett, unharmed. Your researcher and her sister cleared from any ongoing interest on our part. And yourself? We're not interested in your prosecution. We're interested in your removal from the board. You walk away clean, Mr. Kang. We get what we built. The room was very still. Amara looked at Min Jae. He was looking at the phone on the table, not at her. I need an hour, he said. You have 30 minutes. The call ended. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then everyone in the room moved at once. Ryu to the radio, Min Jae to the secondary laptop, the team lead to the door. Organized chaos, the specific kind that has practiced itself into efficiency. Amara stood still in the middle of it. Marcus. She thought about Marcus. Then she stopped thinking about Marcus and thought about the drive in her pocket. She thought about the map she'd built, the 6 weeks of documentation, the financial chains, the property records, the organizational connections. She thought about what the voice on the phone didn't know, that the work product it was asking for wasn't just an archive of evidence against Min Jae. It was also a complete map of their own organization. Every transaction she'd traced, every connection she'd documented, every thread she'd followed from the visible surface down through the shell companies to the living infrastructure underneath. They thought they were asking for a weapon. They were actually asking for their own exposure. Min Jae. Her voice was quiet enough that only he heard it. He came to her. The drive, she said very low. They don't know what's on it. They think it's your operational records, our research on Cho, on the properties, on the Mercer analysis. It is those things. It's also everything I traced about them, their full organizational map from every data point I could access legally. She held his gaze. If this goes to the right people, see, law enforcement, financial crimes investigators, it doesn't just expose your old operations. It exposes the entire infrastructure they've been building inside it. 3 years of activity, documented. He went very still. You give them the drive, she said, and you also notify the contacts, before they can review the contents, before they understand what they have. She paused. They'll open it expecting your vulnerability. They'll find their own. That's a window of hours, maybe less. It has to happen before they review the content. Which means the calls happen tonight. The contacts move tonight. I was calculating, fast, the machinery running at the speed she'd come to associate with him at his most compressed and functional. The 3 contacts they want me to call. Call them. Tell them what's actually happening. Give them the choice to cooperate with the exposure instead of the transition. She put her hand on his forearm, the first time she'd initiated contact with him in 6 weeks, and she felt him register it without moving. Most of the people they're using inside your old infrastructure don't know the full picture any more than Marcus did. Some of them will choose the option that doesn't end with them holding criminal liability for someone else's 3-year operation. He looked at her hand on his arm, looked at her face. And Marcus, he said. Marcus is a thread that pulls in 2 directions. If we move fast enough, whoever's holding him becomes part of the exposure, not a negotiating position. She felt the truth of it as she said it. Not comfortable, but clear. He's leverage that stops working the moment their operation becomes a liability rather than a victory. Min Jae held her gaze for a moment that was doing a great deal of work. Then he straightened. Ryu, he said. Ryu appeared from the doorway. Get me the 3 contacts, and get me the agency line in Seoul. Not the main channel, the back channel, the one from 2019. Ryu moved. Amara reached into her jacket pocket, felt the drive there, small, solid, carrying 6 weeks of work that had been assembled to protect one man's empire and was about to be used to take down a different one. She held it in her closed fist for a moment. Then Min Jae's hand came over hers, brief, warm, the specific weight of someone acknowledging rather than taking, and she gave it to him. The 30 minutes became 45, because Min Jae made the voice wait, and the voice led him, which told her the voice needed the outcome more than it needed the timeline. The 3 calls happened in the first 20 minutes. She sat 2 feet away and listened to Min Jae speak, Korean with 2 of them, English with the 3rd, and watched his face during each call, tracking the responses by watching how his expression adjusted. The first call, difficult, resistant, ending without clear commitment but not with refusal. The second call, shorter, faster, something that landed like agreement before the 2-minute mark. The third call, a man on the other end who was already afraid, whose fear had apparently been building before the call came, who said yes in English so clear and immediate that even Ryu looked up. The Seoul back channel call took 8 minutes and happened in Korean. She didn't follow the words, but she followed the architecture of it. The technical quality of an information transfer, specific, detailed, someone on the other end taking notes. When he hung up, his hands were perfectly still on the table. 30-minute window, he said, from the time the drive transfers to the time the Seoul team moves on the information. That's enough? It has to be. She nodded. He picked up his personal line and called the number from 30 minutes ago. We have an agreement, he said when the voice picked up. The drive transfers by courier. My man, your perimeter. Marcus Bennett releases simultaneously, non-negotiable. A pause on the other end. Brief. Agreed. Your man at the east approach in 10 minutes. The call ended. Min Jae looked at Ryu. Jaewon, east approach. He held out the drive. Ryu took it. His face was the same as always, neutral, floor underneath. But he looked at Amara once before he left, and the look was different from all the previous ones. Not assessment, something else. Something that in another man's face she might have called acknowledgement. Then he was gone. The 7 minutes after Ryu left were the longest 7 minutes in recent memory. Amara sat in the main room with Naya, who had come in from the kitchen at some point during the calls, and was sitting against the wall with her knees drawn up and her eyes moving between her sister and Min Jae with the expression of someone who had understood enough to be frightened and not enough to help. Min Jae stood at the shuttered window and didn't speak. She watched the back of him. The shoulders, not the deliberate stillness she usually saw, but the organic stillness of a man who had committed to a course of action and was now in the gap between commitment and outcome, which was the hardest gap there was. If the drive doesn't do what I said it will, she said quietly, then we're in a worse position than before. Yes. That was a calculation you made. Yes. She held his gaze when he turned. I stand by it. I know. He said it simply, without the quality of reassurance, which was why it actually was reassuring. Ryu's radio crackle came at 11:22. Min Jae crossed the room and picked up, listened, said 2 words. Put it down. Marcus is in a vehicle heading north, he said, released. The breath she took then was the first full breath she'd taken since 10:15. Ryu? She said. Clear. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, Nia was looking at her from across the room with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and the complicated love of someone who has watched their sibling walk into something terrible and come out the other side with her feet still under her. Okay, Nia said softly, not a question. Not yet, Amara said, 30 minutes. Because the drive was in their hands now, and the Seoul team was moving, and the 30-minute window was running, and somewhere in the space between the transfer and the response was the point where tonight either became the beginning of the end of this or became something much worse. Min Jae stood in the center of the room. Amara stood 6 feet from him. Neither of them moved. The residence was very quiet around them. The valley outside the shuttered windows held whatever it held. Darkness, distance, the specific silence of a place that has been waiting for something to be resolved. Her phone buzzed at 11:29. Unknown number, Seoul area code. She picked up, said nothing. The voice on the other end spoke in English with a precision that indicated it wasn't their first language or their second. Ms. Bennett, the information received, verification complete. We are moving on 4 locations simultaneously. A pause. Your contribution to this outcome is noted. The call ended. She held the phone against her chest for a moment, felt her own heartbeat against the back of it, steady, present, the fundamental percussion of a body that had survived this particular night and was continuing to function. She looked at Minjai. It's done, she said. He exhaled. Not a dramatic release, just the small controlled deflation of someone who had been holding something very tightly for a long time and was beginning, cautiously, to loosen the grip. And then her body, which had been running on adrenaline and precision and the suppression of every response that wasn't immediately useful, chose this particular moment to announce that the adrenaline was done. The room tilted, just slightly, just enough. Minjay covered the distance between them in 4 steps and had his hand at her elbow before the tilt completed. Sit down, he said. Quiet. No performance. Sit down, Amara. She sat down. He crouched in front of her, not looking up at her, not performing concern, just level with her, looking at her face with the specific focused quality of someone checking something important. Breathe, he said. I am breathing. Slower. She breathed slower. The room settled back to horizontal. Her hands were shaking. She noticed it now, the fine, rapid tremor of spent adrenaline, the body's honest accounting of what the last 2 hours had cost. He looked at her hands, looked at her face. The baby, he said, is fine. She said it with more certainty than she technically had at this exact moment, but she believed it, and belief was going to have to be enough until she could confirm it with someone qualified. We're fine. He stayed crouched in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, something around his mouth that was the residue of the last 6 hours. The compression he'd been maintaining since 11:40 the previous night, since the decision to leave, since the shot through the shutter, since Marcus's name on that phone call. She looked at his face and understood that she was looking at a man who had just made a series of decisions, the soul call, the 3 contacts, the drive, the exchange, that were not reversible, that had changed the shape of his organization, his exposure, his future, irrevocably. A man who had done all of that in a 30-minute window on the basis of analysis provided by a woman he'd met 11 weeks ago under conditions that had now been revealed as manufactured. Why did you trust me, she said, on the drive? Why did you trust my read? He looked at her steadily. Because in 11 weeks, he said, you have been wrong about exactly one thing. What thing? You told Ryu that what he'd find watching you was nothing. A pause. The almost smile more present than usual, the control around it loosened by the particular exhaustion of the night. You were wrong about that. She looked at him. The residence was quiet. Nia was against the wall, eyes closed now, the specific sleep of someone who has given out in the middle of deciding whether to. The team outside was repositioning, soul was moving. And Amara, sitting in a chair in a stone house on a hillside in a country she'd never been to 11 weeks ago, looked at the man crouched in front of her and felt the full weight of everything that was still unresolved. Marcus in a vehicle heading north, the organization and soul being dismantled, the 3 contacts whose choices were still reverberating, the pregnancy, the contract, the question of what any of this was supposed to become, and felt it not as burden but as the evidence of a life in full motion, complicated, costly, irrevocably changed, alive. Minjay stood. He didn't move away. He stayed close, one hand resting on the back of her chair, not touching her, just present. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to require you. Tomorrow is always going to require me. Yes, he said. It is. She slept for 6 hours and woke to the sound of rain. Not the violent kind, the patient kind, the rain that settles in for a long stay and makes no apology for it. Jeju rain in the early morning, coming down the hillside in sheets that ran against the stone walls of the residence and found every seam and tested it. She lay still for a moment, cataloging the sounds of the house around her. The ventilation, the distant low voices of the security team, the particular creak of the building adjusting to weather, and understood, before she was fully conscious, that she was still in one piece. That was something. She got up, washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the mirror above the basin for longer than she usually did. She looked like someone who had been through something. She'd been through things before, and she knew what that looked like in a face. The slight recession behind the eyes, the quality of a person who has used up reserves they'll need time to replenish. She looked at herself and did not perform anything, which was a relief. There was nobody watching. She put her hand on her stomach, left it there. Felt the breathing that was both hers and something else's now, the dual rhythm of a body that had been hosting another presence through 11 weeks of escalating crisis and had managed, stubbornly, to keep it. Okay, she said to the mirror, to herself, to the pregnancy, to all of it. Then she went to find out what was left of the world. The kitchen was occupied by Mrs. O, who had arrived at the Cheju residence at some point during the night with 2 bags of groceries and the self-contained efficiency of a woman who understood that the best thing she could offer people in crisis was something hot and edible, and had set about doing that without being asked. There was porridge on the stove. There was ginger tea already poured. Amara sat, drank the tea, did not speak. Mrs. O did not speak either. Nia appeared 20 minutes later, hair pulled back, one of the residents' plain sweatshirts over her own clothes. She sat across from Amara and accepted a bowl from Mrs. O and ate 3 spoonfuls before she looked up. What happened while I was sleeping, she said. Seoul moved on 4 locations. The organization's operational infrastructure, the parts we documented, was accessed by Korean financial crimes investigators and 2 cooperating law enforcement entities that Minji's contact activated. Amara wrapped both hands around her tea. It's not over. These things are never over in one night, but the shape of it changed permanently. And the people who had Marcus. 2 of them are in custody. The others, I don't know yet. Marcus himself. Vehicle heading north, last confirmed. She set down the tea. I'll find out more today. Nia looked at her porridge, stirred it. Are you going to contact him? I don't know yet. He might not have known, Amara, what they were using him for. I know he might not have known. But you're not sure. No. She held her sister's gaze. And until I am, I'm holding all of it at arm's length. That's not bitterness. That's just being accurate about what I have enough information to conclude. Nia was quiet. Then, I want to tell you I'm sorry again. I know. Not because I think it changes anything, just because I keep feeling it, and I don't know what to do with the feeling. Amara looked at her sister, this woman who had cost her the most and loved her the longest, who had brought chaos into her life through a combination of weakness and genuine desperation and the specific human failure of someone who makes a bad decision and then makes 3 more trying to contain the first one. She looked at her and felt the complicated layered thing that sisterhood was, the weight of it and the value of it existing simultaneously, neither canceling the other. Keep not gambling, Amara said. That's what you do with the feeling. Nia nodded. Something in her face cracked slightly around the eyes. She looked back at her porridge and ate another spoonful. Minji was in the operational room with Ryu when Amara came in at 8:30. They were on their 2nd hour of work by the look of them. The specific fatigue of people who had not slept, but had remained too useful to the immediate situation to acknowledge that. The whiteboard had been updated. The 3 contacts from the previous night now had notations beside their names that she couldn't read from the doorway. She came in. Ryu looked at her and moved to the secondary position, a small relocation that had a meaning she registered without commenting on. He was making room. Specifically, he was making room for her. The overnight, Minjae said, without preamble. Tell me. Seoul team confirmed access to financial records for the primary shell structure. 3 companies, 18 months of transactions. The documentation you provided formed the backbone of the access request. He moved to the whiteboard. Of the 4 locations, 2 were secured with arrests. 1 was cleared. Occupants had moved within the previous 6 hours, which tells us they had faster internal communication than we anticipated. The 4th location was a server facility. That's the critical one. What happened at the server? He paused, just long enough to be a tell. They pulled physical drives before the team arrived, he said, approximately 40 minutes before. Someone in our communication chain was faster than the window. The cold was familiar now. She'd felt it so many times in the past weeks that she'd stopped being surprised by it and simply moved through it. How many people knew about the Seoul call? In this room? 4. He looked at her. Ryu, Chaewon, myself, you. Then it wasn't this room. No. He set the marker down. One of the 3 contacts I called. The second call. The one that agreed quickly. He looked at the whiteboard. The name there had a line through it now. He agreed because he was going to warn them. He needed me to conclude the call before he made his. But he didn't pull out entirely. He let the other parts of the soul coordination proceed. Because he needed the appearance of cooperation. He walked a line. Min-jae's voice had the flat quality of someone who had been betrayed by people enough times to have stopped experiencing it as surprise and had started experiencing it as information. He kept the server. We got the financial records and 2 arrests. It's not the clean outcome. It's not nothing either. No. He looked at her. It's not nothing. She moved to the board and looked at the full picture. The names, the lines, the notations, the single crossed-out name. The organization that had spent 3 years building a shadow empire inside his was damaged but not destroyed. The financial crimes investigation would proceed. Some of the people would face consequences. Others had already moved. It's going to keep going, she said. Not a question. Yes. Different shape now. Less organized. Without the server, they've lost the central coordination infrastructure. That matters. It means the next 18 months are fractured response rather than coordinated action. He looked at the board. But yes, it keeps going. And you? He turned toward her. Your operation, she said. Your actual current operation. The legitimate businesses, the things in transition. The people around you who know what's happened this week. They're informed enough to be stable. The transitions accelerate. He said it without visible emotion, which she understood as the emotion being very present and very controlled. The exposure of the old infrastructure, the documents they compiled, the ones tied to my name, those are now part of an active investigation. My legal team is in Seoul. The process of establishing what I was responsible for and what was operated under my former structure by someone else is going to take time. How much time? Years, possibly. He held her gaze. This is not a problem that resolves cleanly. I know. You should know specifically that your involvement, your presence here, your work, is documented. The soul coordination happened through channels that will become part of an official record. Your name is in it. She absorbed that. The specific weight of it. Her name in an official record connected to a criminal investigation, a name that a researcher and analyst needed to protect to continue working in a professional capacity. The contribution context matters, she said. Whether my name appears as a party to criminal activity or as the source of the intelligence that enabled an investigation. My legal team is working on exactly that framing. He paused. I won't tell you it's guaranteed. I know it's not guaranteed. She looked at the board. Nothing this week has been guaranteed. Marcus called at 10:14 that morning. She'd been expecting it, not the exact time, but the inevitability of it. The way certain conversations build up atmospheric pressure until they happen. She was in the room they designated as her workspace, laptop open, the secondary draft of the organizational map in front of her. When her phone buzzed with the number she still had in her contacts under the name she'd put there 5 years ago, when a different version of herself had been building a different kind of life. She looked at the name for 4 full seconds, then she picked up. Marcus. Amara. His voice was thin. Not the way it got when he was emotional, the way it got when he was exhausted down to the cellular level, when the thing that manufactured tone and steadiness had run dry. You knew they had me. I found out last night. Min-jae's people got me out. Indirectly. A silence. She let it be what it was. I need to talk to you, he said. Then talk. Not like this. Not on the phone. Another silence. I know you're not in LA. I know more about where you've been and what you've been doing than you probably want me to know. Some of that's part of what I need to explain to you. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. Not performance. She'd spent 5 years learning what his performances sounded like. This was the real thing underneath them. I need to explain some things. You were paid by the Pasadena firm on 3 occasions over 14 months, she said. Consulting fees. 2 of the 3 projects were never built. The properties were used for activity you may or may not have understood the nature of. She kept her voice neutral, the reporting voice, the voice that conveyed information without conveying what the information cost. I know the outline, Marcus. I need you to fill in what I don't know. Specifically, at what point did you understand what you were actually consulting for? A long silence. Can I come to you? He said. No. Amara, no. She looked at the organizational map on her laptop screen. You're going to answer the question I asked. When did you understand what you were consulting for? The silence this time had a different quality. The silence of someone deciding which version of the truth to offer, and then deciding that the version they'd been preparing was insufficient and reaching for something more expensive. After the second project, he said, the Crenshaw property. I wrote the assessment, and then 6 weeks later someone called me and told me what the assessment had been used for. Not in detail, but enough. He stopped, started again. They told me what the firm was. Not everything. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to know that what I'd done was connected to something I couldn't undo by just walking away. So you kept consulting. They made it clear that the alternative to cooperation was, he stopped again. I was scared, Amara. I know it's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. His voice had the quality of something that has been held under pressure for a long time and is beginning to fracture at the seams. I was scared, and I made the decision that scared people make. I kept going, and then they told me what they wanted me to do about you. She was very still. Tell me, she said. They'd been watching you, your professional record, your work. They knew about the fertility treatments. I don't know how. They just knew. And they knew when they stopped working. He breathed. They told me that Kong Min Jae was eventually going to need someone exactly like you, an analyst, someone with your specific background and clearance. And they wanted our marriage to end in a specific time frame, so you'd be available. They asked you to divorce me. They asked me to create the conditions. His voice was barely controlled. Amara, I want you to know that... Stop. Her own voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that is a long distance from calm. Don't tell me what you want me to know. Just finish the sequence. He finished it. It took 9 minutes. She listened to all of it. The timeline, the specific instructions he'd received, the way he'd pulled back from their marriage in calculated increments designed to reach the point of irreconcilability by a specific date. The fertility treatments he'd pushed for and then, when instructed, allowed to fail. Not sabotage exactly, he said, more like strategic withdrawal of effort at the moments it would matter most. She listened to him describe the parking lot outside the clinic, and she thought about the real tears she'd seen on his face, and she understood now that they had been real, that he had wept in that parking lot for a marriage he had been paid to dismantle, and a child he had been instructed to prevent, and the specific grief of a man who understood what he was doing and kept doing it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. The baby, she said. You know about the baby. Yes. From who? Nia, through Keisha. A pause. Amara, I wouldn't have. The pregnancy wasn't part of what I was asked to prevent. By the time it happened, I was already trying to find a way to... He stopped. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, she said. It doesn't. Is the baby? Fine. We're fine. She heard him breathe, just breathe for a moment on the other end of the line. What do I do? He said. Not with direction. With the genuine helplessness of someone who has arrived at the end of a road they built themselves and found nothing on the other side. You talk to the investigators, she said. Everything you know. Every contact, every project, every instruction you received and from whom. You give them all of it and you give it completely, and you don't negotiate the edges of what you disclose because the edges are exactly where they'll look first. She paused. Your cooperation matters. Whether it matters enough to change your outcome, that's not my determination. And us. There is no us, Marcus. There hasn't been since you started following their instructions. Possibly before. She looked at the window, shuddered still, the rain continuing outside. The baby is mine. She's not an outcome you get to have a claim on through guilt or regret, or what you're feeling right now, which I don't doubt is real. If someday, after all of this is resolved and documented, and whatever legal process follows has run its course, If you want to be known to her, that's a conversation we can have then, at arm's length, on my terms. Not today. The silence was long enough that she thought he might have put the phone down. Okay, he said finally. Just that. The word stripped of everything except its meaning. Okay, she said. She ended the call. Put the phone face down on the table, pressed both palms flat against the surface and looked at the wood grain and breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The old technique, the reliable one, the one that worked not because it solved anything, but because it gave the body somewhere to put its attention while the mind processed what it needed to process. She sat like that for 7 minutes by the clock on her laptop. Then she opened the organizational map, picked up where she'd left off, and kept working. Min-jae found her there at noon. He came in without announcing himself. She'd learned to recognize his particular approach, the way his footsteps had a weight and deliberateness that was distinct from everyone else's in the house. He set a plate beside her laptop without comment. Food she hadn't asked for, appropriately bland, the routine care that had become so normalized in the past weeks that she'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the temperature of a room you've been in long enough. He sat across from her. She told him about the Marcus call. All of it, in sequence, the way she told him everything, factual, sourced, without editorializing about her own response to it, which he would see anyway. He listened. His face did very little. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's going to cooperate with investigators, he said. Yes, I told him to. That helps our framing. His testimony about the Pasadena operation's use of his credentials, combined with the financial records. He paused. It matters. I know. He looked at her face. That's not what you're thinking about. No. What are you thinking about? She looked at the plate beside her laptop, picked up the fork, put a small amount of food in her mouth and chewed it, because she was 22 weeks pregnant and had eaten approximately nothing since last night, and the body's requirements did not pause for emotional recalibration. I'm thinking about the parking lot, she said, outside the fertility clinic, the second failed round. She swallowed. He cried. I know you're going to tell me it was performance, but it wasn't. I know what his performances look like, and it wasn't that. She set the fork down. He cried because he was already doing what they told him to do, and he was going to keep doing it, and he knew exactly what it was costing, and he cried in a parking lot in the middle of doing it anyway. She looked up. That's worse than if he hadn't felt anything. Min-jae said nothing, which was the right thing. People make terrible decisions when they're afraid, she said. I know that. That's not exoneration, but I understand it, which is different from what I wanted to feel, which was the clean version, the version where he's simply a bad person who did bad things, and the story is simple. She picked up the fork again. It's not simple. No, Min-jae said. It never is. She ate. He stayed. Neither of them needed to fill the room with anything more than that. 3 days passed on Jeju before anything moved significantly. The rain came and went and came back. Nia settled into the residence with the adaptability of someone who had been shocked past resistance into a kind of exhausted flexibility. She helped Mrs. O in the kitchen. She walked the covered perimeter when the weather allowed. She called a counselor she'd seen twice before and made an appointment for when she returned to L.A. Amara heard her on the phone making the appointment and said nothing, but the thing she felt was not nothing. The sole process produced results in increments. 2 more arrests from the organization's second tier, asset freezes on 4 of the shell companies Amara had documented. The server that had been cleared before the team arrived remained unrecovered, but without the financial infrastructure, frozen, documented, under active investigation, its contents had less operational value than they would have had 24 hours earlier. Min-jae's legal team filed the formal framework distinguishing his criminal enterprise from the shadow operation that had run inside his former infrastructure's dormant structure. It was not a clean filing. It was designed to be accurate, which was more defensible and more complicated. He told her about the filing on the second evening, in the main room after dinner, while the rain ran down the stone outside and the valley below was lost in cloud. The process will take time, he said. My exposure, the part that's legitimately mine, is real. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. I know it is. There are things I did over the past 12 years that I'm going to have to answer for. The shadow organization's activity makes the picture more complicated, but it doesn't erase what was mine. He looked at his hands, the gesture she'd come to know as his version of looking at something honestly. I want you to know that. Why? He looked up. Why do you want me to know that specifically? She said. He held her gaze for a long moment. Because what happens next, between you and me, I don't want it built on anything that isn't accurate. A pause. I don't want you to make a decision about your life based on a version of me that doesn't include the parts that are costly. She looked at him steadily. This man who had crouched in front of her in a crisis and told her to breathe, who had put ginger in her hand at 5 in the morning and never made her feel surveilled by the care, who had run criminal enterprises and made calculations that had cost people things and was now, at 42 years old, in a stone house on a hillside in the rain, trying to describe himself accurately to a woman who was 22 weeks pregnant with a child he had decided to protect before she'd admitted it existed. I know what you are, she said. I've known for weeks. I'm a researcher. I don't miss things. Then you know the parts that are hard. Yes. She held his gaze. And I know the parts that aren't. He was quiet. I'm not making any decisions tonight, she said. I'm not making any decisions this week or this month. I'm having a baby, and I'm managing the aftermath of a 3-year conspiracy that dismantled my marriage and put my sister in danger. And I have a contract that has 3 months remaining on it, and I'm going to let all of those things be what they are before I decide what comes next. She paused. But I'm telling you that I know what you are, the complete version, and I'm still sitting in this room. The rain on the stone, the valley and cloud, the lamp on the table between them casting the specific warm light of a room that has decided to be a shelter rather than a checkpoint. Minjae looked at her for a long time. The contract, he said. 3 months. After. After is a question I'll answer after. She picked up her tea. One thing at a time. He almost smiled, more fully than she'd seen it, with less of the restraint that usually contained it. One thing at a time, he said. They returned to Los Angeles 11 days after they'd left. Not to the estate immediately. Minjae arranged alternative accommodation first, a property in the hills that had not been in any database she'd found in 6 weeks of research, which suggested he had resources she hadn't yet mapped. She stopped trying to map them and accepted the room with east-facing windows as a recurring feature of wherever they put her. The estate was cleared and assessed and deemed secure within a week. She went back on a Tuesday, and her room was exactly as she'd left it, which she hadn't expected and found disorienting in the way that ordinary continuity can be disorienting after extraordinary disruption. The lamp in the same position, the desk exactly that, the east windows showing the same hills in the same morning light. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then she went to the kitchen for ginger tea and got to work. The conversation with Nia happened the 4th day back, in Amara's room, on a Tuesday afternoon when the light came through the east windows at the angle that made the room feel larger than it was. Nia had found an apartment, a different part of the city from the one she'd lived in. A deliberate choice, something she mentioned without commentary but that carried obvious weight. She'd attended 3 sessions with the counselor. She'd told Amara both of these things in passing, without making them into events. They sat on the bed, not face to face, side by side, the way they'd sat on the floor of their mother's house during storms when they were children, pressed together against the headboard of whoever's room they'd ended up in. I've been thinking about what you said, Nia said, on the phone. When I called you about the men outside the building, she paused. You said I had a choice, that I made one and I made it about you instead of me. I said it because it was true. It was. It is. Nia looked at the windows. I've been carrying the gambling like it was something that happened to me. And some of it was, I know now that some of it was designed to happen to me. But some of it was just me making decisions that felt small and turned into something large. She paused. I'm not asking you to reassign who was responsible for what. I just want you to know that I understand the difference now, between the things done to me and the things I did. Amara looked at her sister's profile, the particular angle of her jaw that had been their mother's jaw, the way she held her hands in her lap, fingers slightly curled, the posture of someone guarding something. I know, Amara said. I want to be here, Nia said. When she comes. I want to be the aunt who actually shows up. She stopped. I know I have to earn that back. You don't have to earn it back, Amara said. You just have to keep doing what you're doing, showing up, not gambling, calling the counselor. She looked at her sister directly. That's it. That's all I'm asking. Nia's throat worked. She nodded. I'm going to be here, she said. I mean it this time. I know. Amara put her arm around her sister's shoulders. Nia leaned in. They sat like that for a while in the afternoon light, two women on a bed, the complicated architecture of their shared history holding them both up without requiring that they discuss it. Sophia Bennett Kong was born 7 weeks early on a morning when the Los Angeles sky was the specific washed-out gray that comes after a 3-day rain system. There was no warning that prepared Amara fully. There had been appointments, monitoring, the Tuesday doctor who came to the estate and measured and reassured and flagged the dates. But early is early, and her body made its own timeline, and at 3:40 in the morning she woke to the sensation of something shifting in the fundamental way, and she sat up in the dark and understood without drama that tonight was the night. She was at the hospital by 4:15. Min Jae was beside her by 4:17. She did not know how he knew. She had not called him first. She had called the doctor first because that was the rational sequence. But he was there when she came through the second set of doors, already in conversation with the medical team, already cleared, already present. She looked at him in the corridor light. You weren't going to call me, he said. I was going to call you after. No, he said. No, she agreed. He walked beside her through everything that followed. Not in front of her, not managing, beside. There when she needed him there, back when she needed space, without her having to manage the direction of it, which was the thing she had not known to need until it was simply happening. Sophia arrived at 8:22 in the morning, weighing 4 pounds and 11 ounces, and she was the most alarming thing Amara had ever seen. Too small, too early, the specific terrifying fragility of a life that had arrived before it was finished becoming itself. The NICU team moved with focused precision, and Amara watched them work with the part of her brain that had been cataloging competence all her life, assessing and filing, and found them to be exactly what she needed them to be. Min Jae stood to her left while they stabilized Sophia. His hand was close to hers, not touching, almost touching, available. She took it, held it. His fingers closed around hers without adjustment, without ceremony, the way something closes when it's been waiting for an opening and was always going to respond when it came. Sophia's vitals stabilized within the first hour. Amara cried then. Not before, during, or throughout, but after, when the stabilization was confirmed, and the team lead said she was strong, and the room changed temperature from emergency to something else. She cried standing up, which she'd always done when she cried honestly, because her body had never gotten the message that crying was a sitting-down activity. She put her free hand over her eyes and cried, and Min Jae's grip on her other hand stayed exactly what it was. She's strong, he said quietly. She has to be, Amara said. She's been through a lot, and she's not even a full day old. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but held the shape of one. Sophia spent 18 days in the NICU. Amara was there every day. Nia was there every day. Min Jae was there every day that he was in the city, and on the days he wasn't, Seoul, the legal process, the ongoing dismantling of an organization, and the building of a different one. He called it the times he knew Amara would be there and asked questions that were specific and direct. Her weight today, her oxygen levels, what she did when Amara held her. He came the 7th day when Sophia was alert enough to be held for the first time. He was still in his coat, just arrived from the airport. He sat in the chair the nurse indicated and held out his hands in the way the nurse showed him, and Amara watched him take her daughter, their daughter, the word she'd been orbiting for 7 days, into his arms with the specific terror of a man who has handled power all his life and has just been handed something he understands he cannot afford to drop. His face did something she'd never seen it do. Just opened. The compression she associated with him, the managed surface, the controlled machinery, it simply wasn't there. He looked at Sophia with the undisguised face of a man encountering something that exceeded his categories. Amara watched him hold her daughter and felt the specific feeling of a floor holding. The contract expired on a Tuesday in October, 3 months after Jeju, 6 weeks after Sophia came home from the NICU. 11 months after Amara had signed 12 pages at a kitchen table in her sister's apartment with a disposable pen while the city was still dark outside, Minjae came to find her in her room, the east-facing room, her room by now in the way that spaces become yours through months of inhabiting them. At 10 in the morning, he knocked. She said, "Come in." He stood in the doorway for a moment, which was unusual for him. He generally committed to movement in the same way he committed to decisions, fully, without the hesitation of the threshold. "The contract," he said. "I know what day it is. I want to—" He stopped, started differently. "I transferred the agreed payment this morning, the full amount, and Nia's account was settled at the original terms. Thank you. You can leave whenever you want." He looked at her directly. "I want to be clear about that. The door is open. It was always going to be open." She looked at him in the doorway of the room she'd lived in for 11 months, with Sophia's bassinet visible behind her and the east windows showing the October morning and the encrypted drive on the desk that she'd never returned and never been asked to. "I know," she said. "You told me that a long time ago. I'm telling you again because I want the choice to be real." She stood up from the desk, crossed the room, stopped a foot from him, close enough that the closeness was its own statement, and looked at his face. "I've been making choices all year," she said. "Every day in this house was a choice. Every morning I got up and worked for you was a choice. Calling you in the middle of the night on Jeju was a choice." She held his gaze. "I know what free looks like. I've been exercising it for 11 months. He held her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. The thing that happened in his face then was not the almost smile. It was the actual one, full, unguarded, the face of a man who has spent decades building walls and has just, in one breath, stopped needing them. He reached out and tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. A small movement, careful, the kind of gesture someone makes when they've wanted to for a long time and have finally run out of reasons not to. His hand stayed against the side of her face for a moment. She covered it with her own hand. The year that followed was not easy. She had not expected easy. Minjae's legal process moved slowly, as legal processes do. There were filings and counterfiling, testimony and documentation, months in which the outcome was genuinely uncertain, and they both knew it and kept moving anyway. He did not face the worst projections his lawyers had prepared him for. He faced something more moderate, more complex, requiring specific penalties and specific structural compliance, rather than the catastrophic scenarios that had seemed possible in October. It was not nothing. It was not everything. He began the transformation of the remaining operational infrastructure in earnest, not overnight, not cleanly, but with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. There were people who left. There were people who stayed. There were things that could be made legitimate and things that simply had to be ended. He ended them, one by one, with the patience of a man who understood that the work of becoming a different kind of organization was the same as any other work. You did it in sequence, and you did the next thing, and you kept going. Amara returned to professional work at 7 months postpartum, part-time at first, then more. She was careful about who she worked for and under what conditions. She was good at it. She'd always been good at it. And the year of the most difficult work she'd done in her life had made her better in ways she was still cataloging. Nia stayed clean. There were hard weeks. There was one night, 4 months in, when she called Amara at 11 and said she was sitting outside a place and she was going to go in and she needed someone to stay on the phone with her. Amara stayed on the phone for 2 hours. Nia did not go in. Sophia grew at the pace of someone making up for a rushed beginning, fierce and determined, with strong opinions about everything within her reach, which at 5 months was still a limited range, but she was working on it. She had Minjae's eyes, which surprised Amara and moved her in a way she didn't try to analyze. She had the Bennett jaw. She had opinions about sleeping that she communicated clearly and at volume and showed no signs of revising. Minjae held her with increasing confidence and decreasing terror. He talked to her, not the baby voice performances of people who felt self-conscious, but in his regular voice, as though she were a person he was keeping informed about the situation. He told her about whatever was in front of him. He told her the weather. He told her the name of whatever she was looking at. She responded to his voice with the specific attention of someone who has decided a particular sound means safety, which was the thing he had been quietly working toward all his life without understanding that was what it was. The proposal happened in a kitchen at 6 in the morning with Sophia in the carrier on Amara's chest because she'd been up since 4, and that was the only position she'd accept. Not a ring on a table in a restaurant. Not a constructed moment. Minjae, standing at the counter with 2 cups of tea, turned around and said, "I want to marry you. Not as a contract. Not as an arrangement. I want to marry you because you're the person I want to be accountable to for the rest of my life." Sophia, apparently sensing the weight of the moment, grabbed Amara's collar and pulled. Amara looked at Minjae over her daughter's head. At this man who had made her sign a contract and put ginger in her hand at 5 in the morning and crouched in front of her in a crisis and told her to breathe. Who had run an empire and was working daily to become something different. Who had looked at her daughter's face and opened in a way she hadn't seen him open for anything else. "You said you wanted to be worthy of being chosen," she said. He looked at her. "You are," she said. They married in November. The ceremony was small. A room, the right people, Sophia in a dress she immediately objected to and then tolerated. Nia was there. Ryu was there, which surprised some people, and not Amara. Mrs. O made food that was eaten completely. Park took photographs on a camera that was not his phone because he developed opinions about documentation quality. Amara stood beside Minjae in a room full of people who had witnessed the year that had made this possible and said yes with full knowledge of everything the yes contained. Not the clean version, not the easy version, the actual version, costly, complicated, chosen on a Tuesday in October when the contract expired and she stood in the doorway of a room that had become hers and told him she wasn't going anywhere and meant every word of it. Sophia Bennett Kong grew up knowing her mother had torn up a pregnancy test and her father had once been the most feared man on the West Coast, and both of those things had somehow led to her, which she would eventually decide was the most interesting origin story she'd ever heard, and she was not wrong. Outside, the city continued. Los Angeles at noon, golden and indifferent and going on. And inside a house with east-facing windows, a woman who had once believed her life ended with divorce papers held her daughter against her chest and felt the whole complicated weight of a life that had taken the hardest possible path to arrive somewhere worth arriving. She hadn't lost everything that morning in the lawyer's office. She'd only thought she had.